embryo to like the reproductive organs. And so she builds this really interesting thing. And when you come here, you see her works out here, which are a kind of retrospective of her prints. Right now, Lalita is being celebrated by everyone, and this is a kind of retrospective of her prints, where basically Lalita had a very difficult life, where she was married, and but you know that marriage was not really successful, and she had to go through and between relationships, and you see that all of these are kind of investigations, psychoanalytic investigations of her dreams. So, for example, out here, Des reading a book of poems, a dreamer, you know, a clown family, and these are all kind of they're kind of comments on themselves, where you look at the fact that the mask is something that we wear in relationships. Out here, you have three masks, so the involvement of a third person. Here you see this is a last painting where you have her pumping blood into Frida Kahlo, and these are works by Judy Bloom-Reddy, which are basically on ledger sheets, you know, like where you do accounts. She writes the names of mountains and passes and forts, etc. Because these are the constructs we're taught in school of a nation, you know, like the Rafaltine Palace, the Siva Desert, the oasis out there, where we go and claim nature in a nationalist manner. These are works by Divya Kalustri, and they're really interesting works because Divya comes from a micro-minority in India called the Zoroastrians, who basically came from Iran around 1,300 years ago, when there was the Islamic invasion, and they found refuge in India. And in India, we've never prosecuted any religion until now. In our history, we didn't. And we were a refuge to Muslims, to Christians, to Jews, to many people. A bit like Egypt in a certain way. And so she is a part of a minority, which is around 70,000 people. And those 70,000 people are actually spread across India. They come from a certain privilege, and they have this kind of a life that is kind of a reminiscence of the colonial culture, but also not. It's a kind of a melange. And this is her aunt who passed away, her grand aunt, and she was a woman who was kind of very fashionable. She was kind of independent, lived between Switzerland and England, and there's a big story. She went between places, and she uses all that she's left of her, these props of her, which are actually where she becomes this kind of phantom within an architecture, this kind of colonial architecture. There are photos of families. Here's a room so warm and blood clothes. I swear you will wake and mistake these walls for skin. You know the saddest thing that you see in Cairo, and I see this everywhere, and we've seen it, you know, the minute our grandparents are away from us, when they pass away, they take away the histories of that past, of that cosmopolitan past, of those conversations of their friends. And we're actually at that juncture right now. And so I really think Divya's works are really fabulous. You know, here she's sitting, you know, in this really like kind of royal way, and you know, this kind of intimacy that she has with her grandparents and her family, one might think is like, oh, you know, like we are always complaining about our families. But you know the amount of conversations they're going to lose when they're not going to be around us. And this is a kind of generational change because they're going to be the last people who met people from the 19th century. And you have a complete erasure, and we're at that juncture. And maybe visual arts is an interesting place where we can actually, you know, deal with that. These are works by Abdulaziz Raiba, and one must remember that both Egypt and India were part of the non-aligned movement. We all romanticized art as this kind of great dialogue between nations. And Abdulaziz Raiba came in the 1950s. He came and showed in Cairo Biennale. He was also showed at the Egyptian Museum of Modern Art. He had works collected by the Egyptian Museum of Modern Art. We have no idea where they are. I hope to find it in the antique shops of Cairo so that I can go back and become a millionaire, but I don't know that that's happening. But so I got his works and another constellation of works within it to construct this idea of international dialogue in this idea of the post-colonial world. So for example, out here, Indira Gandhi, who's a great woman, you know, she did a lot today for India, but she also had, you know, some kind of narcissistic, you know, habits of, you know, introducing socialism that actually ruined India and Egypt, where socialism was not something that was actually going to bring great good in the utopic idea that was going to push forward, but it was going to bring power to these politicians. And so when you look at Indira Gandhi's portrait by Lalita Lakshmi, it's an interesting question of a feminist artist, making a portrait of the first Prime Minister of India, but also someone who, for 1.5 years, ran India's first dictatorship. And here you have two drawings I find in the Cairo flea market of this Jewish artist. This is almost kind of a conceptual work, and then this is a portrait of a guy called Kena Mikhail, and I looked him up, and he died in the United States. He's a Jewish expatriate who left Cairo and went there. And here you have stamps by Lalita Lakshmi for India's 50 years of independence, where she draws clowns as stamps. I don't know if she knows the irony, but you see also Nasser building the nation. This idea of men building the nation, and the nation, and the nation is something that we're being also told now. And so this large mural that you see is done by 7 artists. There's Prabhakar Kamble, Bhushan Bumbale, Mayuri Chari, Vikrant Bise, Mukhtar Kazi, and Pisarvo Jitendra Suralkar. All of them are kind of famous artists, and we bring them together to make this kind of this fake Mexican mural. But it has elements from Africa and India, this kind of international dialogue. And why do we need an international dialogue? Because of this question of solidarity that I spoke out there. This idea of solidarity, if we are not in solidarity with your issues, at one point, the national predator is going to come upon you and take away all that you have. And there has always been a dialogue between India's erstwhile untouchables, who are called Dalits, but now they identify as Ambedkarites, and with the black consciousness movement. So for example, you see Sheikh Anta Diop and Ambedkar. Both of them are polymaths. They wrote on economics, on science, on social structure, on politics, and they were people who were looking forward, in this kind of non-cynicist space. And you have Savitribai Phule, and she was in the 19th century asking women to be educated, how and why women's education was really important. You see the Black Panther there, you have the Black Fist, you have also this king, called Sahu Maharaj, who actually saw that dismantling caste was really important for that future, where dismantling the caste system was the only way that future could be seen, and he funded the education of Ambedkar. So this kind of very extremely complex, tapestry is made as a kind of a statement, because when I came to Cairo, we realized that Cairo has been curated by curators who have put money from their own pockets, that we're coming into a space that is very public. We're in the Citadel, it's a center of power, it's a center of history. Salahuddin was one of the most interesting rulers in Islamic history. There's an idea of social justice, one of the only rulers who thought about social justice, and so now he's completely celebrated across the races of Islam. And I say that because Islam is contributed by black people, by Arabs, by Indians, by Indonesians, and all of them celebrate Salahuddin, while the rest of the caliphs, etc., have kind of contested positions. And so when you look at this, it is like when you look at this, you have this kind of constellation, and this constellation is centered by a portrait of Maqbul Fida Hussain, and Maqbul Fida Hussain was this man who was a self-taught artist, who was a street painter, but he came to Cairo quite often because he was going to Paris, and he started the Progressive Artist Group. And the Progressive Artist Group was also, ushered in by Jewish immigrants who were fleeing the Shoah from Eastern Europe, and they brought together Abdulaziz Raiba, Maqbul Fida Hussain, Nawaz Jijina, many other artists who were basically really interesting people, and they were Muslims, they were Hindus, they were Parsis, they were Christians, and he made this constellation of modernism in India. And I was talking to Farida the other day, and we were thinking about this idea where sometimes we look at both Egyptian and Indian modernism, and there's a constant criticism that it is, what is Egyptian in it? But what I think is Egyptian and Indian in it is not only the aesthetics of it, but this want at that moment to universalize, and this idea of this conversation. And so for me, what made me really excited was these forgotten stories of Indian artists who might have gone through Cairo, because Cairo was in between Europe, between Paris and Bombay, and Air India would stop here for 3 days. So, for example, you look at this, it's a man who comes up from a phoenix who arises from bones. As a work by Krishna Reddy, who had to leave India in 1950, and he went to Europe, and throughout his life he supported the Palestinian movement. And his wife is Judy Bloom Reddy out there, and both of them have been really instrumental in talking about nation and the context of nation. Like, for example, if you look at her, that's Zarina Hashmi, who makes these works around maps and the partition. And when you look at her nationality in this exhibition, it is India and Pakistan. Like, you see Francis Newton Sousa, he's actually an iconograph, you know, like he's someone who's like, you know, contesting icons, but he came from Goa. You have Jean Bhuvanagri, who was a Parsi magician in this exhibition. You have, you know, Sanat Ali Jafri, of Rose Vijayan. You have, you have all of this entire constellation. There's also a facsimile of a print that was made by Krishna for the exhibition for Palestine. Because one of the biggest solidarity exhibitions that ever happened, which actually is a great list to look at when you're looking at Arab, Indian, African artists, is the exhibition for Palestine in 1970, where all of them came together and all of them made etchings and prints and woodcuts to build this exhibition that went to Tehran. And when it got to Tehran, the revolution happened, and so all the works are there in the Tehran Museum of Modern Art. And so you have this entire constellation of Indian modernism. I was really keen to bring it here, and it's impossible to bring all the original works because each one of them are in the millions of dollars. But what I was thinking was this idea of making the constellation, because it could have conversations with similar looking works here. This is a work by Vikrant Vise, who made that work of violence are there. You see women carrying babies or children who are dead in their shrouds, and this is and they covered. They are probably Muslim women, or they could be women of from farmer backgrounds, but they could be the victims of all those people who have been killed by the state, when they have protested or for their identities, etc. But also these women are praying to Savitri Bai Phule. When you look at the painting, it also draws from what you would see as religious iconography from Christianity, but also in India from Nathdwara. And he appropriates it for this kind of secular question or vision. And the work that you see down there is a man crouching. A man crouching, trying to save himself from stones, from sticks, from himself from being lynched. But also, he's a man who could be praying, And that's the work by Saleh Ansari. When you look at this wall, you see there's so many Muslim artists. But now in India, at this moment, the presence of Muslim artists is almost marginal. And when you look at Saleh, he's one of the artists who, being a Muslim, is very fearless and it speaks against the kind of Islamophobia he faces and his community faces, and this kind of, hullabaloo around Muslims and them not being part of our nation, etc. and everything. And what I love about Saleh is that this work that really is iconic to the many cases of violence that have actually happened against Muslims in India in the last few years, and it also makes a statement because it is very site-specific. Like if you look at the work out there, it is a very site-specific work in the sense of like how we place it. It's also like almost the position of prayer. So how your pain becomes a position of prayer. Why do people pray? When we question the whole right of people wanting to pray, what do you imagine people in Palestine would be doing right now? Should they be listening to BBC reports or our Instagram stories? They're not doing that. They're looking out for hope. And hope may be the only thing that keeps them going, and keeps them out of this situation. And when you look at both sides out here, when I was here in Egypt last time, there was an artist called Akshay Mahajan. He's a photographer who was here with me. And he was in Calabria, and he builds this kind of imaginary around, objects found within a museum in Calabria. Aldora is the village. Almendora is the village. And you see a lot of votive figurines, you have, photos, you have many things. But it's also how these people in this Calabrian village have the responsibility of actually maintaining this kind of these structures, and you see how much Egypt does to actually, Egyptians do to actually maintain world history, like the sites. You know, it is such a collective effort to keep all of that alive, and somehow in this exhibition, I'm actually now going to pass on the baton to Angels, but before doing that, Rola, she helped us. Nola, she helped us a lot. Come here. She was amazing, because she decided about how we were going to actually, in the end, get these works onto the wall. She ensured that things were cut into pieces, because I'm very messy at times, and we also built a kind of a connection with that traffic, where we were able to do the between installs of others, so that they were not stressed, and we made it very simple. And do you have anything to say, like how it happened?
Well, basically, I think everything was already planned out. I think you had a vision in your head, and we just helped you with the double take.
Actually, nothing was planned out. We had a vision, but then we were walking through that, and it came, and it came, and it came.
But once you put things together, I think it's like you should. Oh, I'm gonna put that there. I'm gonna put that there.
Yeah.
So I think like
No,
everything went together beautifully.
And when I came here, it was not for them. I came here, there was no room for me, because all the curators were fighting for their rooms.
They were fighting.
So then I sort of got into the corridor,
I like
and then all of the curators got angry that I had taken the corridor. Which is like, yeah, it's Angels.
I also love what you said to us like a few days ago, how it's supposed to look like a government office.
Yeah. Like in government offices, we've also, like, there were old portraits where Divya's works are, and we've put those works there, because I guess there would have been Nasser out here and also that,
It's honestly a collage that tells a beautiful story. I'm very thankful you did.
Thanks.
But this is also a nice hinge in this area, because we're splitting it in kind of two parts, but we also worked quite organically on this whole exhibition. And I think that this is actually a very interesting connection, that these archaeological remains that Akshay has been working with in Colombia, it's all about trade. They're amphoras that are traveling the world. So we're continuing on this idea of ports, cultural exchange, but every trade was not only objects, but also people, ideas, culture. And so this is also a kind of precursor to a modern world. And this fact that Cairo has always been this kind of hinge between different places in the world, and that many of these artists from Bombay were coming to Cairo on their way to Europe. So this is also a meeting point between Sumesh and I. And last year I went to Bombay and I met many of these artists. And in the summer, Sumesh came to Spain, and so we kind of exchanged.
We met the artists also.
And we met artists there.
We met Fernando, Cristina,
exactly.
Alberto.
And so it continues kind of
Claudia.
also on the same subject of the state, of borders, of trade. And the first work that we have here is by Fernando Sanchez Castillo, who's an artist who lives in Madrid. And the sound is off right now, so we can actually go in the room and I can speak about the piece, and we can come back later and hear it with the music. But typically in this work there's classical music playing. We stand here out of the beam of the projector. What you see are two armored police vehicles that are shooting their water cannon shooting. So usually these are used to disperse crowds. And they're here in this kind of lonely landscape. This was filmed in the Netherlands, a very kind of controlled society where everything is constructed artificially. And you see now that this is the end of the film and they're meeting their ship companion. And the whole film kind of develops as a love story between them. And so it's quite a humorous and artistic gesture of trying to bring kind of the humanity to these vehicles and think of how could they be used to perform poetry. But you know that when music is on.
But also, like, you should see the dressage, because the entire film is like a dressage, like between horses, and the dressage was like a kind of act of like dance. And Napoleon, who attacked Egypt, we must never forget, like when Napoleon came to Egypt, he came with artists, with architects, with people who were going to archive the visual history of Egypt. And 100 years later, you had the art decorative, and you had Art Deco that came out of it. And when you look at the Art Deco buildings, it's a kind of aviatory situation. It's like almost like you see all of that, and you just need to go to Luxor or to Memphis or anywhere, and you see the origin of all of Art Deco coming from Egypt. And what I really like about Fernando's work is it has this kind of dressage with this music, which actually Napoleon came up with the idea of turning around. When we turn our car around on the same spot, it was Napoleon who came up with it as a war tactic to turn carriages around at war. And it happened while coming to Egypt. So there's many interconnections there.
And we can continue outside because we have one artwork just in front of the mosque up here. But the Napoleon connection is also interesting because just after the campaign for Syria and Egypt, Napoleon went to Spain and actually conquered the land there. So Fernando also has a work about Goya's famous painting, The 2nd of May. And in May there was an uprising of the people in Madrid against the Napoleonic forces. And from this, Goya made this famous painting, which was really changing the way that artists were depicting war, because he showed it from the side of the uprising, and he really showed as they were being massacred, lined up in a row, and shot by the French forces. So we also made this historical connection back to Napoleon's time. And then here what you see is a work of Cristina Lucas, another artist who lives in Madrid. And you see the dome shapes, which echo the kuba of the mosque, actually represent hemispheres of the globe. So it was here in Egypt that Aristophanes was the first person to calculate the exact circumference of the Earth. And he was able to do that only knowing the distance between two cities and the shadow that the sun made. And using trigonometry, he was able to correctly calculate what we know today is the size of the planet Earth. So here, Cristina has made 3 versions of navigating the globe. And the first one, which was in the early 16th century by Ferdinand Magellan and Sebastian Elcano, was actually at the same moment that this mosque of Suleiman Pasha was built. So we put this temporality connecting these 2 moments in time, the first circumnavigation and the building of this mosque. The second structure over there represents the present day circumnavigation route that includes the Suez Canal and the Panama Canal. And the one in the back represents the future, when global warming will melt the Arctic, and then a circumnavigation trade route will be opened around the North Pole. So we can look here, and I think it's really beautiful, especially in the daytime, because of the shadows that also reference this act of Aristophanes of calculation. And here the continents are not clear, it's only the lines of the trade route. So for instance, you have this kind of dramatic moment with a lot of zigzags, and this is the moment when Ferdinand Magellan died and Sebastian Elcano took over. And so you can see here that there was some confusion. Elcano was not such a good navigator as Magellan, so they go back and forth, and in this moment they're in the Philippines and going from one island to the next, confused about which direction they have to go in. So we continue inside this building over here. And in here we have 2 more rooms.
Right.
It was amazing to make that work here with people working. They did a wonderful job, bending all the metal in the correct way. So in this room, we have 2 artists. The first artist here is Claudia Faget-Raval. She's an artist living in Barcelona. And this work is called Fugue 3 Times, so there's kind of 3 episodes of a narrative. And here what you can see is actually carbon papers. So these are familiar to anyone who's writing accounts. So you have the kind of carbon copy, the real and the carbon copy. And she uses these to reference bureaucracy, to reference with state governance, but here specifically the archive of the port of Barcelona. So there's also this reference to the gerund, which is a grammatical form of erasing the subject. So for instance, to say that the crates are lifted, but you don't say by who. So the human is actually erased from these documents and left in a kind of suspension. And this is, of course, talking about how objects can move around the globe, but people are kind of denied the same right for economical purposes. And here, Claudia was considering these sheets as kind of sketches to put down the relationship between the body and the sea, herself and a mountain in Barcelona that overlooks the port. So you can see these, and it was really wonderful because here we were able to do the Arabic translation, and so it's only in Spanish and Arabic. But we wanted it this way to just only the original and the local language. And in this room, we also have Kamal Bakri, who made these photographs over here. And this, he's actually training and running up and down the stairs of buildings and seeing Cairo from this angle, which completely changes the city and shows kind of how the city is living, how architecture is alive, and people are creating these kinds of constructions, things are falling down, and you see kind of the skyline. In one over there, also the Citadel appears, so kind of this presence of history kind of overbearing over everything. And there's also this image here, which is very popular with people, which shows actually just our meeting when I met Kamal Bakri in a cafe, and I took this picture just casually. And he said, "Angeles, give me this picture, and printed it out and framed it. And it turns out that when the cats stick the tongue out like this, it means they have an ulcer. So this picture, he showed it to the veterinarian, and it was actually able to make some form of social change. So this work I consider more of like a social project, because he was actually able to save this cat's life, and it shows the documentary potential of photography. And upstairs we have a final room, which is actually a video room. We go upstairs. And this is the final room. Wait for the others to arrive. Yes, and this is the final room. I'll just explain because it's two films, two videos. Oh, it's very loud. Maybe we can do it here.
Yeah.
Is this better?
Yeah.
Okay, so then in this final room, first there's, it's again, the two black and white films, and they're using kind of the body as object, as choreography, in order to show kind of state and border violence. The first film is by a Cuban artist, who lives in Madrid, and he's showing geometric forms, and people must show their ID to be admitted by an officer. And it's not really known why, it's not known how, but it's a slow hourglass that filters to the bottom. So it's waiting in order to wait. Afterwards, we have a film by Santiago Sierra called The Maelstrom, which actually premiered here in Cairo. And this film was made with the Talinding United soccer team in the Gambia. And they again perform a kind of choreography of violence. And the whole time they kind of go against the wall, and the camera is almost acting as a kind of state force. And as they kind of perform this choreography, there's a meditative loop over and over that repeats a famous speech of Josep Borrell. And Borrell is a Spanish politician who's the EU High Commissioner for Foreign Affairs. And it's a famous speech that repeats, "Europe is a garden. Most of the rest of the world is a jungle. The jungle has high growth potential. The wall will never be high enough." And it repeats over and over. So yeah, I invite you to take a look. that's actually the last works. So it's been really wonderful, and for me it's also been great to be able to bring this all together here and find these connecting points. In the end, these both are very